So I believe I'm live. Every time this day comes around, I'm like, am I doing the right? How's technology working? This is how I know I'm getting older. I think that's the message I'm getting. Um, okay, so every month there are two main events that I put on. One is a LinkedIn Live event, which is today, and today we're talking about how stress spreads through teams, and then that's the second Wednesday of the month. And then on the fourth Wednesday of the month, we have another session, which is actually based within our school platform. So that is a private group. Let me see. Okay, perfect. So if you are a manager, if you're a director, excuse me, if you are a decision maker within your company, if you're within HR, you are head or lead of a department, for example, and you're managing teams, then I am directing to you. So, one of the things that came up within some research is that a lot of managers who become managers in their 20s, for example, I think on average, that is often where they become manager the first time around, at least, don't receive actual training until their 40s. And you might have experienced this. So you might be one of those people who are put into a position where you actually don't know what you're doing. You're given mentorship if you're lucky. But because you're good at delivering, you're assumed to be good at managing, which are two completely different skills. And you would have seen this. Delivering would have mean a lot of client fronting work. You might have been working with, I don't know, whatever it is you do within your industry, you're delivering the actual product or service that the company sells to be able to make profit. But as a manager, that's not your role anymore. Your manager, as a manager, your role is to look after, is to improve the performance of, is to regulate, it's to manage confrontation between teams, and it's arranging teams, putting them together in such a way that they work well together, but also being able to get the best out of them, which is completely different to the skill set you need to be able to deliver a product or service. So what I found is there's a lot of stress within that zone, within that area as being a manager, even if you are skilled and developed. The world currently is throwing all kinds of things. And today we're looking at how stress can spread through teams. So there are a few concepts that I'm going to go across, but overall, there's going to be a lot that I'm going to be sharing with you, and I wanted to make sure this is on LinkedIn so that I can keep this. Um, there's a few frameworks I use with clients I've used with clients before, which I'm going to touch on as well, and it's going to be very practical. So it might be one of these things where if I'm going a little bit fast, please let me know. Ask me to slow down in the comments, in the chats, whatever it might be. I should be able to see it here within Restream. If I'm going too slow, tell me we got this. Keep going, speed it up, right? Let me know where you are. And if as you enter, just let me know whereabouts you're from, where you're calling in from, which city, which country. It would be great to hear because I like to find out where people are calling from. These days when we're working online, everything is completely international. So people can be calling in from anywhere, which is always exciting to see. All right, so the first thing I want to do is I'm going to start from the presentation that I have for us today. I'm going to see if I can. Okay, let's see if we can make it full screen here. Tecnologia. Share. Interestingly enough, the navigation seems to have changed. That's interesting. This is one of those beautiful moments, and I've had this before when I was doing a workshop, and everything was just in a completely different space. And that's one of those moments where you have to actually exhibit. You show exactly what we're talking about a lot of the time, which is navigation of stress. So in that moment, you can see how I navigate that. Internally, there's a lot of breathing exercises going on. I'm sitting here thinking, okay, where does this thing need to be, etc. It doesn't have to be a complete blow off the handle scenario, but it could have been. All right, so how stress spreads through teams. Um, it's a really big question I've received from a couple of clients that I have worked with over the past few years, just because it's sometimes considered that stress is an individual thing. And I hope by the end of today, we'll be able to have enough evidence for you to see that it's not just an individual thing. The stress of one person affects the stress of another person, and the stress of a team affects a company, and vice versa. The stress that a company experiences, which is part of a framework I'm going to introduce you to later, is going to affect the team, which is going to affect the individual as well. One thing I will say is, because there's so much in today's session, it is likely to go to more like 90 minutes than the 60 that I was aiming for. So we're starting at 6:30, which means we'll probably finish around 8. So I just want to give you a heads up if you are, I know it says here 6:30 to 7:30, but there was a couple of things when I was going through this where I thought I'll either split it into two sections or try and put it into one. Now, I've tried to put it into one and I'll see how much I get through. But if we don't, then it will have to be two. But the middle ground is to make it 90 minutes. So I'm just going to jump through. Quick shares is welcome, as we say in Sierra Leone. So today's session is the organizational nervous system and the leadership leverage point. So nervous system is considered as part of your body, how it works, how it functions. When it is dysregulated, that's when we consider ourselves to be in a fight or flight response or stress response. And as an individual, this shows up in all kinds of ways, right? So you breathe quickly and sharply, your behavior changes, you might physiologically change, your emotional change, you experience stress and anxiety, all these kind of things happen. But there is an organizational equivalent to this, which is what we're going to be unpacking today. And we're going to see how leaders can leverage their own stress response to work with a team, even in the midst of an organizational nervous system that's dysregulated. And we'll define that as we go. So, my name is Andre Bright. I am your coach for today. And I help highly driven and deeply responsible senior managers who are at or beyond their capacity. And the main thing I help them do is to reclaim their clarity, energy, and identity, because those three tend to go first. And they often are the ones that affect their performance in the workplace. I am burnout prevention coach, like I mentioned, but I'm also co-founder of Udo Health. So a lot of the time when we work with corporate companies, that kind of thing, it's usually through Udo Health. And if you're working with me individually, or if you're a part of my Ascend program, which I'll tell you a little bit about towards the end of this program, that's more to do with me, and that's Your Burnout Coach Limited. All right. So the first thing to note is that stress is a contagion. I was doing some research on this recently, and you would have seen this. If somebody comes into a room stressed, it dysregulates the entire room, especially if it's a manager, though. If it's somebody who is quote unquote meant to be having it all together, etc., it dysregulates the rest of the team. Now, the double-edged sword of this is that as the manager, it kind of adds more pressure on you, where you don't feel like you can express stress because you don't want to dysregulate the team. But what that ends up happening is, you, like a fizzy bottle, you can hold it all in, and unfortunately, it'll come out somewhere if it's not something that's processed. And I saw a interview recently with Leela Hormozy, and she was talking about how she doesn't need to process or regulate stress if it doesn't become stress in the first place. What she said is her capacity for stress is such that she reframes and she works through things in the moment so that it doesn't become stressful. which is one of the ways that you can approach it, right? If things happen, how do you process it? How do you approach it? What are your processes so that you have something to run to and you can go through without necessarily having it as an emotional response to it. But if you don't, and it becomes something that dysregulates you, it would often dysregulate another person. And that is when it becomes a contagion. And it also long term becomes culture. And I'm going to speak about this a lot through the process of this particular talk, because this is where it really becomes a problem. When it becomes a culture, it means that not only do you constantly revert back to that level of stress as your baseline, it means that actually becomes uncomfortable when it's not a stressful period of time. And then you start to create stress. And you would have seen this with yourself. If you have found yourself in a very stressful period of time, maybe it's been a few months, you've been going through a merger, you've been experiencing redundancies, you've started a business, but you're finally in this moment where actually things are okay. You're taking a holiday, things, your systems are in place, all this kind of stuff. So you take a bit of a break. You might notice in that period, your heart rate is still racing, your mind is still running about what, trying to put out fires that don't actually exist. It's because you've constantly been going at such a pace of stress that that has become your norm. And when it becomes norm organizationally, it becomes your culture. And I'm going to break that down a lot later on. Um, so keep tuned for that, what that looks like. So when teams are stressed, performance looks like reactive decision making. So instead of it being proactive, so likely if you have regular meetings, you're doing sprint runs, you're doing all these kind of things, then you might be able to anticipate changes that are going to be coming. But the likeliness is things are going to come which are out of the plan. They're not part of the plan. No one could have seen it. We've just come through a pandemic. This credit crunch is on its way again. All these kind of things could be happening that you don't necessarily see coming, and you can often become reactive. And the reactive decision making means that you're making decisions based on short term as opposed to long term a lot of the time, right? It can also show up as short term thinking, like I mentioned, conflict avoidance or escalation. So one of the things I've seen with teams, and you've seen this anywhere with families, with friendship groups, whatever it might be, the groups that are able to handle conflict are often the ones that are strongest tied. They're often the ones which have more trust, the ones that are that last the longest. If you avoid or escalate conflict in a sense that it becomes unmanageable, then that can often be the start of the end. It starts to break down the bonds between you. And in a team, this is what can signal the beginning of the end. But it can often happen within stressful situations, and that ends up building low trust situations and high defensiveness. So instead of actually listening to each other, you're protecting each other because you're in fight or flight. Your organization is under a certain kind of change. The leadership don't regulate their nervous system, and so it showed in their behavior, which the team pick up on, and so they become defensive. It's like crabs, for example, right? When they sense threat, or an octopus, for example, you have defense mechanisms that you put into place to protect yourself when you sense there being a threat or a danger. And a threat or a danger isn't just the actual thing, but a message that signals the thing. And in that case, if you have a leader who is usually pretty calm, and then one day they're not, then that will send red flags into your mind, and without realizing, you might go into um, protective zone. And what happens here when you become defensive is you stop listening for what is actually being meant, and you start to internalize and project, and all these kind of things start to happen. But then you also reduce your creativity, because the thing with creativity is it means risk. To be creative means risking failure. To try something different, to try something innovative, means that you are stepping out of your comfort zone, and you're not going to do that if you feel under threat. And so you're going to reduce your creativity and go back into what's always worked. But what's always worked is often what's got us there in the first place. And then you reduce ownership because you don't want to be attached to something which might not work, because you are conscious that in this moment you're under stress, and so is the company. So burnout is rarely individual. And I know this sounds like a very weird thing to say as a burnout prevention coach who works with individuals, but a lot of the work I do is to help an individual work with what they've got. But often they're going to be going back into environments which are the actual problem. So it might be the company, it might be the environment. Right now, we're working in systems where we are aware of all the horrible things that are happening within the world. We're working in uncertainty about job security. All these things are happening, and those are causing the environment psychologically, emotionally, which could cause burnout in long term because we haven't really had let up in the last, I don't know how long now. Like I feel like every 2, 3 years tops, there's something else which is existential that's happening around the world. And then you add on the level of being within the company. Are there mergers? Are there acquisitions? Are there redundancies? Is there you're trying to go for a promotion? Your team's breaking down. Someone's left, and they've left a gap within your team. All these kind of things might be happening within the team, and then you have things happening at home. You might be moving house, having a child. Maybe you're experiencing bereavement. All these things are happening in all kinds of different areas, and there's systems happening that are affecting the individual, which cause the burnout. So it's not just about the individual doing their breathing techniques and all that kind of stuff, because that is really helping you regulate your body, right? But after a while, you got to look at what's happening outside of the body, what's causing the body to need to regulate in the first place. And that's where the systems come in. So burnout is rarely individual, it's often systemic. So it's often the decisions of the company, it's often the decisions of the government, it's often decisions that are happening halfway across the world that are having an effect, a knock-on effect on our own experience, which is what we're then trying to manage. And this is at this point, I'll introduce you to a framework that I developed early on, actually, within my uh, burnout coaching. It's called the corporate stress mapping model. And this one is something where there's an entire workshop around how to use it, but I'm going to give a really brief, high level example of what it is. So on the vertical axis, you have the symptoms and causes. Symptoms are above the line, causes are below the line, as the iceberg would suggest. And then on the horizontal line, you have the internal stresses on the left-hand side and the external stressors on the right-hand side. So what you would do, and there's a version of this which is the individual stress mapping model as well, is you'd ask the question, what are the symptoms that I'm seeing? And you'd map them above the line. And what are the causes of those symptoms? You map them below the line. And then from what is above the line, you separate into what is happening internally and what's happening externally for the symptoms, and what's happening internally and externally for the causes. So this is what it can look like when it's filled in, and this is as here's one I made earlier, as they would say, is this one is populated with common, I'd say, influences that you're probably going to have within a company. So above the line, internally, you might have internal symptoms might be high turnover, decreased engagement, absenteeism, low productivity, etc. Um, External symptoms might be supply chain disruptions, economic downturns, market competition, etc. Those kind of things. Now it's good to notice, and the reason why I map this out is, for example, the bottom left quadrant, which is the internal causes, are often the things we can actually do something about as an individual coach working with an individual or a team. This is looking like poor leadership and management, lack of career development, and inadequate communication, unclear job roles, all that kind of stuff. Those are the things that within, like, the HR, within L&D, within coaching and mentoring, those are the things that are affected. But you see all these other quadrants that the individual doesn't really have influence over. Like the individual isn't going to have much influence on over globalization pressures, right? There's not a lot an individual within a company can do about that, but they are affected by it because the company is affected by it. And so their managers are affected by it, which means the team is affected by it, which means them as part of the team is affected by it, right? If the company decides to go bust or declare bankruptcy, if the company decides to pivot and look for other suppliers and all these kind of things, all these things externally affect the actual person internally. So this is a really good tool. What you do is you basically just take this as a blank sheet, populate it with what you see, and there's, like I said, there's lots of processes, questions for you to be able to populate it. We'd usually do it as a 2, 3 hour workshop, and you really get a good snapshot of everything that's happening, and then you can kind of say, okay, cool, this is what's happening, and this is the effect that's happening. What can we do about it? And then you get down into another workshop afterwards, which actually breaks down into what to actually do as your individual roles. All right. So one thing to note at this point is the business culture behaves like a nervous system. Like I mentioned this before, but it senses threats and adapts, right? So the business culture as well senses threats and adapts, just like your bodily nervous system does. All these things that are happening externally, it senses. The moment something pops up in the news that's happening with a war, for example, it's not just you as an individual watching it. As a business, you're thinking, as a decision maker, you're thinking, how is this going to affect our company? And how can we be proactive to avoid it? Which means changes internally, which means that the teams and the individuals will be affected. Everything is connected. So then you have what I call anyway, the stress transmission chain. So it starts in the boardroom. These are those who have read the newspaper, they've seen the footsie, you know, levels right now. You've got all these international issues that are happening. Maybe there's a new competitor on the scene. Maybe there's a lawsuit they're trying to avoid. All kinds of things are happening in the boardroom. And this gets filtered down into the leadership because then they have to look after and deal with the managers, train them, prep them, get them ready so that they can deliver, they can adapt and deliver the teams. But within the teams are a set of individuals. And so the stress from the boardroom leaks down all the way down to the individual who may not have ever met those who were in the boardroom. And this happens, and then this next bit is really important because the way it looks practically is actually the same way as how it looks between person to person. All right. So I really like the book. Oh, what's it called? It was the title of the book has escaped me now, but it's a white book and there's a black version of the book, and it's basically why is the name escaped me all of a sudden? Um, anyway, it looks at evolution, it looks at all this kind of sapiens. There we go, sapiens. There's a part in the beginning of Sapiens when it talks about how if an alien came down, they wouldn't be able to touch a business often. They'll be able to touch the product. Sometimes they'll be able to touch the service or whatever it might be, but you don't wouldn't be able to touch the business because a business is an idea. It's something that exists, which is incorporated. It has all these legal frameworks around it, but it's not a thing that you can touch. Like this is a cushion, not a business, right? But a business created it. So a business is actually made up of people, and people behave like humans, right? So the same, I often say being an adult is basically just like being a tall child. A lot of the challenges you have in the school playground, you see in the workplace. And so when it comes to interpersonal relationships, a lot of the same systems happen, whether it's a family, whether it's a friendship group, whether it's a community, whatever it might be. So stress travels the same way within a company as it does anywhere else. So it looks like tone. And you might notice that people say it's not what you said, it's how you said it. If someone is stressed and they don't regulate themselves, the way what they're saying comes out can indicate to somebody that something is wrong, that either they might feel like this is targeted towards them, or you are experiencing something which is making you dysregulated, which means I'm now feeling the effect of that dysregulation, right? It might come up like urgency, everything needs to happen now, right? there's no, and it's funny. I have a client who's was diagnosed as ADHD in their later years, in their 50s. And one of the things that came up through researching the ADHD framework within the mind is that usually there would be certain levels of consciousness which are on, certain levels of consciousness which are off. So, for example, there are certain elements that you're actively thinking about and certain things that are passive. And for example, some people get the passive elements switched on when they're in the shower, when they're driving. You know, you have an idea all of a sudden. It's not that it wasn't on at all, it's just it was dormant. The problem with ADHD is that both are on at the same time all the time. And so there's this idea of urgency can be really difficult because it's either now or it's not now. And everything being now becomes overwhelming. Now, if you have an organization which is acting as an urgent, every task is urgent, every task feels late, no matter what time it is delivered, then there's no priority list, there's nothing. Everything is just number one priority. That can add you into all kinds of different levels of pressure. And then you have the availability expectations. They start to expect you to be picking up on the weekends, expecting you to be working through the night, delivering this because it is so urgent, right? The meeting cultures change. You know, maybe they start with a little bit of a check-in, and now those check-ins are gone. We're going straight into the business. There's no rapport built. There's no trust nurtured, right? Maybe there's performance pressure. You know, you've been doing this for 5 years now. We need to get you up to this point, like yesterday. All of a sudden, although there hasn't been an action plan, I've experienced this. You know, people expect you to be a certain level of performance, and they haven't provided any training. And so all of a sudden they're like, you know, why aren't you performing at this level? And you say, how could I? Like you break down the scenario and say, if you were in my shoes, what would you do? How could you do this? And silence and fear is probably, I'm not going to say the most dangerous, but it's definitely really challenging and debilitating, because what silence means is that there's a lack of information and we fear what we don't understand. If you think about a relationship, silence can often be the biggest problem, lack of communication, right? So there's two different things when it comes to communication. It's what you communicate and how you communicate. And I often ask this question: if someone says you're a poor communicator, is it because you don't communicate well or you don't communicate at all? Like, so something might be happening and they don't say anything about it, but you see the effects within the workplace and you're wondering, what is this? Why are they running so fast? Why are these deadlines changing? Why are these teams changing? Why am I being removed from one group and put into another group? Who is this new person? I didn't realize so and so left. All these things might be happening, but without communication, which leads to fear. And humans co regulate. And unfortunately, they co-regulate up as well as down. So when you're regulating yourself, you can up-regulate, which means getting yourself into a higher vibration or energy, if you like. And that might be needed if you're going to be doing a presentation, if you're going to be doing a workshop, if you're going to be public speaking or doing some kind of team building exercise. But often you might need to down regulate when you need to work, when you need to concentrate, when you need to calm down in an element of stress. If you have someone who's dysregulated, unfortunately, humans co regulate. So one person's dysregulation becomes another person's dysregulation. They co regulate, they find the same level. And your nervous system influences mine. And I would encourage you to actually take a moment at this point to think about the last time this might have happened. When was the last time you had a scenario, an experience where someone's dysregulation dysregulated you? Think about it. When was the last time that happened? Was it in a meeting? Was it in a training program? Was it in a client presentation? Like, when was the last time someone's dysregulation dysregulated you? And think about how that happened, why that happened, and what could have been different to avoid it happening. And that last one is really important because it's all good knowing that it happens, but if you don't know how to avoid it happening again, it can keep happening, especially in an organization which has developed a culture of this. So the four main cultural stress carriers that I've identified anyway, excuse me, one is the communication style. So there's a few, but the idea is that how do you generally communicate? Is it through one-to-ones? Is it through group coaching sessions? Is it through team building? Is it through just bumping into them on in the corridors? Is it through emails? Is it through calls? Is it through bulletins, or is it through internal messaging systems? Whatever it is, how do you usually communicate and how frequently? What is the usual cadence? What's the usual rhythm when your employees, when your teams feel the most seen and feel the most, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Regulated, feel the most understood, appreciated. What is the communication style that's happening around that time? Don't just assume that it's just because it's a fluke and it's a one-off. Actually interrogate it. When we were at our best, what were the elements that helped? When we we're at the worst, what were the elements that didn't? So, what communication styles actually work well with this particular individual? So, for example, this person is really prefers to know everything via email. They just want to be able to read through it in their own time. Sometimes they can't, just respond immediately. They need time to process something. Whereas this person, I can just tell them something straight off the top of the dome, and they will be able to go back and do something about it right now. Both of them will end up coming with the same outcome at the end of the day, but how they like to be communicated is completely different. Some person might prefer to be pick up the phone and just call them and talk to them. Some other people might just tap you on the shoulder and ask you a question if you're working within the same office. Some of them don't like that. Some of them might feel like it's a breach of their personal space. And then we have different levels of, you know, and I mentioned ADHD, it might be autism, it might be all these kind of things, or just different communication styles that are happening within the same team. And the best case scenario, and if you have started listening to our podcast, What a Relief podcast, which is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc., one of our guests is going to be coming on in a few weeks, and he talks about how he's got a little, almost like a report for each of his um, employees, because each of the members of the team, because what that helps him to do is say, okay, if so and so calls me, I know that this is an immediate issue because they only come when there's something that is an emergency, whereas this person comes to me for anything. So it may not need to actually be an emergency. If I get a message from them at 6 o'clock, it's a slightly different meaning to if I get a message from this person at 6 o'clock, because I understand their style of communication, right? So it's two-way. The second one is workload norms, right? When these change, you've got six members of a team. Now, usually each one has a maximum of 3 or 4 projects they can handle at any one time. And all of a sudden, you're expecting six. And I've experienced this. One of my first places of work, I had 3 projects, which are huge projects that were stretching me. And I remember speaking at a performance review and saying, I'm really struggling actually with these 3. What can we do about it? And they ended up giving me 2 more. And then at the next performance review, they were commenting on my lack of performance. I was like, listen, this workload is insane. And then as it went through with the little back and forth that we had, we realized that actually what they needed for this role was a senior person where they didn't have to train them, because the company was growing so fast that they didn't have the time to do so. All right. So thinking about workload norms, like, has workload become such a high level or such a high rate that we've normalized it, but it's actually not healthy? Think about reward systems as well. So how does this reflect on as a stress carrier? Is it that you are usually um, is there a billboard which has, I got a friend of mine who has this within their company, it's a finance company, so it's all based on performance, and you can see it, in terms of how many sales you get, how many projects or clients you get, can you see it? And is there a reward system that matches that level of stress, right? Or is it just something that you use it as a stick but there's no carrot? right? And then psychological safety. If this was an iceberg, if this was an image, the psychological safety would be the bowl, it would be the foundation that supports it all. Does your team feel comfortable showing up as themselves? Do they feel like their um, reputation, their career, their job is on the line if they speak out about something that isn't going well? Can they communicate to you when they are stressed? Do they feel like they can come to you and feel understood? Because sometimes when a, an employee comes to you, it's not necessarily to fix the problem, it's just to be seen, it's to be understood. Do they feel like they will be heard? And will this happen if you're under stress? Do you know as a manager how to regulate yourself? So when your team members come to you with something, um, you're able to regulate yourself to pay attention to their needs, you know? And maybe it's an element that you enlighten them on what's happening on the wider scale, but you do it in a way that helps them understand their experience and their role and the importance of what they're doing, as opposed to just using it to shut them up, right? So, signs of systemic dysregulation, and we talked about this a lot, but I'm just going to high level cover this. Um, an organization is generally dysregulated when, like I said, everything is urgent. People over explain to avoid blame. Now, this one is something that I've seen in a couple of organizations where an individual is so under stress, they feel like if I say everything, it means I covered all my bounds, right? They go into the details because, and you notice this, if someone lies, they over explain. If someone is unsure, they over explain because they're almost processing it as they speak. So when someone is really comfortable, they tend to be able to um to truncate what they're saying. Like you have brevity in that sense. They make things really simple. They'll explain to you what you need to know and won't overburden you with what you don't. But when someone is dysregulated, they tend to over explain. And a lot of the time it's so that they can avoid blame. So they can say, "Oh, but I told you da 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 da." Right? So meetings often feel tense as opposed to productive. So and you feel it the moment you come in. There's a tension in the room. There's something that's being unsaid, or something that is being said, right? And it's getting to the point where you feel unsafe sometimes. It might be physically, but it might be psychologically as well. Like, do I feel like I'm okay in this room, or do I feel like, oh, they're about to announce something? I can feel shift in the energy. This person has come in, and I don't know who they are. They're from an external party. Like, who are they? Managers tend to shield teams from leadership pressure, right? So, and which is it's a curse and a blessing because when you shield the teams from leadership pressure, it can feel like a good thing because you're keeping them safe, quote unquote. And as a parent, you might experience this. You don't want the child to be thinking too much about the world and all this kind of stuff. But there are certain things that a team needs to be aware of to be able to understand the context of what they're doing, so that they understand the impact it will have. And the flip side of it is, and I've experienced this, when the team member doesn't understand the wider impact of what they're doing, they can lose connection with it. They can actually lose this element of purpose within it because it's like, okay, cool, I'm just doing this for the sake of doing it. So what's a mistake really? And sometimes we can do such a good job of shielding the teams from the pressures that we as managers experience that we actually do them a disservice. So high performers tend to disengage when it's under pressure. And you might see this. They're still functional, they're still performing, but the high might disappear, right? They might just scrape in now. They're starting to do what needs to be done. They're not going over and beyond like they used to because they're not sure what is actually going on. Like, so they might feel to themselves, okay, I can do this like normal, but there's no guarantee my job is secure. There's no guarantee that the goalposts won't change. Like, why would I put everything in this if I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow? Right? And then conflicts become political. So it becomes less about the individuals, more about all these wider issues that often aren't communicated. That's when you start picking sides and things like that. And and those can break down internally as well. And people stop taking initiative. I mentioned earlier on about creativity. If you're not sure about what's happening, if there's lots of pressure and there's organizational dysregulation, you're likely not going to be taking initiative because you just don't know how it's going to be. How can you take initiative if you don't understand what's happening, right? So it's important to keep these things in mind. Ultimately, linking this back to what I said earlier, when urgency becomes the culture, stress becomes the identity. When urgency becomes the culture, stress becomes identity. And what I mean by this is culture is something that's felt, right? And you can put all your missions, visions, and values on the website, but the culture is what people actually feel, the actual individuals and teams, which means that a good task I often give to people is if you want to understand your culture, instead of looking at the website for a reference, ask someone who's actually working there what they would say the mission, vision, values should say based on what they experience, and ask someone who's new to a team what they have observed. That is often a better indication of culture. And if urgency is one of them, everything needs to be go, go, go. Like you don't have time to stop. You feel guilty or you feel like you're letting the team down if you take a break. You feel like everything needs to be done yesterday. So you work into the night and you feel like you're on your own. You feel like um, you're constantly putting out fires. That can become part of the culture, which means the norm, and then that's levels of stress becomes this identity. Like I said before, it feels strange when the stress isn't there. Like you come in one day and everyone seems calm, and that is what makes you feel uncomfortable. If you're in a high pressure industry, tech, health, finance, for example, and you come into work and everyone's like, "Hey, how you doing? Hey," da, 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 da." You're like, "Whoa, what is going on?" Not because there's anything actually wrong, but just because it's so different from what you used to. I had a friend of mine who said they joined a new company recently, and it's so different from what they're used to. They felt almost uncomfortable in this new space because people are dressing down, they're walking around casually, they're able to talk about things as if they're able to manage them. They leave at 5 o'clock, but they still get the work done. And she's like, "How is this even possible? In the last company, we were 8 o'clock at night. We're still like really, really working hard, but this company is doing even better than the last company, but they seem to be doing it in a way that feels so calm and collected. I don't understand, right? Culture can be completely different, but the stress becomes an identity. So I want to introduce you to something real quick, which is the team regulation audit. And it's really simple. There's just five categories that you rate your team on. And it's 1 to 10, 10 being the highest level of this. Clarity is the first element, which is looking at expectations and priorities. Are you clear? Excuse me. Are you clear on the expectations and priorities, or are they hidden? For example, are one of the pet peeves I find, which can actually be really disruptive for a team, is if the expectations or priorities are based within the mind of the person who's given it, who might be like the leader or the supervisor or something, but it's not necessarily written down anywhere. It's not somewhere that they can pull up on screen and say, "Okay, I need to be working against this." They just say it within a meeting one day and just expect you to know, or that person then comes back and says, "Actually, I want this," which means the priorities have changed and they haven't been communicated to you. Or what ends up happening is you do a great job and you deliver it, and they say, "Oh, this isn't what I want," because the expectations haven't been made clear, the priorities haven't been made clear. So you've been working on something which wasn't urgent, even though the thing that is urgent is now needed in an hour, but you've been spending the last day working on something which you thought was urgent, right? So do you have clarity? 10 means that you have absolute clarity on what the expectations are and what the priorities are. Trust, you have psychological safety. Do you feel comfortable within your group, within your team, as a manager? Like, do you feel like you can trust each other? Do you feel like it's two-way? The next one is capacity, and this one's really important because it's looking at what is realistic in terms of the workload. Now, what can be really difficult is when you have different capacities in the team. One person might have a different level of expertise, or they might just have different strengths, which means that giving them a certain amount of workload might be easy for them. But while another person within the team with the same amount of qualifications, for example, might take longer or shorter based on how they process things. Do they need to read things once, twice, or three times? Do they need extra support to be able to develop this? Do they need AI? Do they need all these technical aspects? Do they just need time? Do they need space? Do they work better alone as opposed to in a group? And then they'll come and deliver, and then they can talk about it. Like, how do they work? What is your capacity? Do you have capacity individually, and does your team have capacity as a group? So I've had situations before in the workplace as well where we bring on a new client and they give us all this work and we only have three people on the team and we're looking at each other like, when's the deadline exactly? And you expect us to do this by ourselves? Well, there's no way. We don't have enough hours. It takes X amount of days to turn around these drawings, and this is how many drawings you're expecting of us within this time scale. The maths just do not work. And so you might need, in that case, like, is it that you're looking externally? Do you have external suppliers or contractors you can bring in to support your teams to be able to deliver at that workload? The emotional tone, this one's when it starts to be getting more towards the soft skills. And this is within the meetings, within one-to-ones, there's general communication. What is the tone that you're communicating with, right? Is there, are you good at that level? Is there, if you were to rate it number 10, it means that the emotion tone is perfect. Like it is stern when it needs to be stern, it's gentle when it needs to be gentle, it is direct when it needs to be direct, right? Within the meetings, within the one-to-ones, all that kind of thing. And is there space for recovery? So does your team recover, period, right? Or have they been so stretched over the last year or and 3 months that they haven't actually had rest? Like, speak to HR, who's actually taken time off. Annual leave is it's still rolling over since last year because they don't feel like they can take time off because they feel like the whole project is going to fall over, or whatever that might be. You know, do they exhibit boundaries? Do you exhibit boundaries to show them that they can exhibit boundaries, right? So rate that on one in a scale of 1 to 10, and I'm going to show you what it means with regards to low levels of each of the score. If you've got low clarity, it usually means that there's confusion, right? And like I said before, if you've got low trust, it means that people are often defensive, right? If you've got low capacity, it usually means that you're heading towards burnout, right? So, and it's not just like low capacity is in we just have low capacity, it's in relation to how much workload there actually is. So you can have relatively high capacity but still burn out if the workload is so high that it super exceeds how much capacity each individual has. If there's low emotional tone, it means there's an emotional suppression. That's when things like microaggressions and things like that start happening, when people are manipulative, when they don't say what they mean, um, when they don't mean what they say, or there's low emotional tone. But there's also low recovery. You get long-term dysfunction because it might be functional in the short term. It's like, okay, cool, we're just going to do it for this month. But if that month comes to an end and then the project extends by another 6 months, or if that month comes to an end and there's another project waiting to be starting because it was meant to be already worked on, then it means that you don't get that break. And then long term, it becomes dysfunctional and the whole team breaks down because you can't be on all the time. So, like I said, when urgency becomes culture, stress becomes an identity. And I'm going to keep ramming this home as something that you'll remember. When urgency becomes culture, stress becomes identity. It becomes who you are. And it means that, and the challenge with this as well, actually, now we're here, is that when stress becomes your identity, you stop to look for other ways of doing things because it's not you. You know, if I pride myself on how busy I am, then you'll be surprised how many clients, when I ask them, so what is an alternative to being this busy? but still being productive without even thinking about it. They say that's not possible. I have to be busy to be this productive. They won't even entertain the thought. When actually, a lot of the time, there's things that you're doing that may not be as productive as you think, that may be able to be either eliminated, it might not be needed, but you're just doing it because you've always done it. It might be able to be delegated. It doesn't need to be you that does it. It might be able to be rescheduled to be able to be done at a time where the actual pipeline and priorities are a better fit. There might be all kinds of things. It might be able to be done in a way where if you were to receive a certain amount of training, you'd be able to do it faster, which means that you spend less time doing it, um, which means it frees up time, right? If it takes you 3 days to do something, and now with the extra training, it takes you one, then it means you have a little bit more wiggle room, right? All these things can happen, but when stress becomes your identity, you don't even look for the option. So this is what escalation can look like. You have the pressure, which brings urgency, and then people become reactive. When they are reactive, there's often miscommunications. They don't mean what they say, they don't say what they mean. They might have missed out something, or the tone isn't right in an email. All these kind of things happen, which lead to mistakes. Maybe something wasn't communicated right, the expectations, or the deadlines, or the priorities, or something like that. And so mistakes happen, and then the blame happens. Instead of managing it well, it's like, oh, see, so and so did that. I told them to do that. And remember what I said earlier on about the over explaining? I told them in that meeting, you can see in the email, I told them exactly what to do, and they didn't do it, right? Which adds more pressure, and then the cycle continues. So leaders don't only set culture through values, which they do, right? So the values are made by the organization as a whole. Leaders are meant to express this, and that bleeds down into the team. But they also set it through nervous system state, right? So I hope you've seen that by now. The nervous system of the leader is going to have an effect of the nervous system of the company and the team. So what about resilient cultures? How do they respond as opposed to the non-resilient ones that we've mentioned so far? Well, they are the ones who are going to prioritize clarity over chaos. Clarity is paramount. Clarity in a business, it's so important to be clear on what you're doing and why, because once you do that, the leader can actually step away and the team can continue performing. I had an experience in a company I worked for before where our our leader, uh, the partner, had a health issue and they were gone for a number of months, which ended up going into years. But the team could continue because we had that system. We were clear on our processes. We were clear on what to do. We were clear on how to do it, and we were able to keep going even without that leadership because they had set the tone already. They've done a great job at that. They prioritize rhythm over constant urgency, right? So you know that there's going to be areas, uh, time periods where there's going to be high urgency and low urgency. There's a rhythm between the two. And there might be a daily rhythm, a weekly rhythm, a monthly rhythm, an annual rhythm. Like, so for example, within architecture, when it comes to winter, you tend to see a lot of the companies start to slow down over Christmas and all things like that. And then it builds up again in the first few months of January and February. There's a rhythm in the same way as how you have cycles of nature, you got cycles within the industries, right? So when it comes to financial, global financial economics, like there's often um, at times of breakdown, there's often a time of recovery, right? Or there's rhythm to the whole thing. So if you're aware of these things, then you can add them to your priorities. And then repair over blame. So something happens, something goes wrong, even if it is someone's fault or someone did something which had an adverse effect on someone else in the team or the product or service that you're trying to deliver. Instead of going to blame, they go to repair. Okay, what happened here? How could we have done this differently? Where did we fail you? What do you need from us? How can we make sure this doesn't happen again? Those kind of questions quickly build repair over blame. And they also look at recovery instead of this idea about pushing through. I always tell this story because to this day, I still remember this interaction where I'm working, it's within my probation period, but I'm in the office at like 9, 10 o'clock. And one of the directors from another department comes in to get his coat or his jacket or something like that. It started to rain. And he sees me in there and it's like, what are you still doing here? I'm saying, oh, we've got this deadline and stuff. It's like, okay, look, one of three things is happening here. Either one, you're lazy, which I don't think you are because I've seen you work through, even though I'm not necessarily working directly with you. Two is that you don't have the you need more training to be able to do what you need to do within the time scale you've been given to do it. Or three, you've been given too much for anybody to achieve within this time scale, which is why you're still here at this time of night. And I remember thinking that's so true because I was just pushing through because I felt from the organization, from the team, that that's what I needed to do. There wasn't space for recovery because the company was growing so fast. So the resilient cultures prioritize recovery over pushing through. They know that pushing through is great for the short term, but if we want to have a sustainably growing company, we need to factor in recovery. In the same way as how athletes, in the same way as how um, our bodies, in the same way as how nature factors in recovery as part of the natural cycles, we as a businesses need to do that too. Yes, Alex. Alexander Pemberton in the building. Nice to see you, man. Thanks for joining us. Clarity is so important in all aspects of life. Great place to start. 100%. 100%. And it really is, man. It really is. Clarity is so important. So now I want to talk a little bit about the steady culture framework. It's really, really basic concept that I've put together just because this was for a client where they needed a process to say, okay, when these things happen, how can I approach it in a way that can give the results that you're talking about? And so I call it the steady culture framework. The first step is to signal clarity. So what matters now, as opposed to generally, what matters now? In this moment, we've received this information, this change is happening. Um, this project is crumbling in some way. This project is landed on our lap, or we're taking the blunt of this workload from another department. What is happening? What matters now in this period of time? What is the focus for our team? What can we put away, and what do we need to bring into the forefront? And then it's the tone leadership. How can we communicate under pressure? Now, this might mean regulating yourself before you go into and meeting the team. Like I always talk about how I do my breathing within the lifts, all this kind of stuff. But when you show up within your team, what is your body language saying? What is your rate of speech saying? What is your tone saying? That they can feel regulated as well, even in the midst of pressure. Because pressure builds diamonds, right? Pressure is not necessarily the problem by itself, it's how we manage it. That's the problem. If we don't manage it well, we become dysregulated. But pressure can also push us to achieve great things. So how can we do it and look at it instead of as a threat, look at it as a challenge or an opportunity? How can we say, okay, guys, we've got this deadline coming up. If we make this, we're going to put ourselves in the forefront of this and we're going to have X, Y, and Z as a result. Because as you know, globally, we're trying to get to this stage. This is going to be one of those key projects where we're going to, if we do this just right, we're going to set ourselves up to be on that ladder that we're aiming for. And you'll be able to get that thing you wanted. You'll be able to get that promotion, whatever it might be, right? E is for expectations reset. So now this thing has changed. The expectations need to be reset, right? So it's capacity based planning. What capacity do you have right now? What capacity do you have right now? What are you working on right now? Okay, cool. So out of those ones, what actually needs to be done within this week? What can we close out this week so we can focus on this next priority from next week? Okay, cool. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to aim for that, right? So you start with capacity of what is actually right now, what can be closed out or put aside, for example, so that you can focus on whatever's happening right now. Next one is accountability with repair. right? So no blame spirals. So I've talked about blame over and over again in this because I really do see it as something that not only crushes an individual, but it breaks down a team. The blame culture is something that's so toxic that it really doesn't help. So accountability is important though. So understanding that, okay, cool, this was my responsibility. I did not do what needed to be done, but here, what could we do to repair it? Yeah. And that often with everything we're doing, a lot of this starts from showing it as a leader, showing representations of it and saying, actually, I'm going to demonstrate what it looks like to be accountable to my decisions and actions so that my team can be accountable to theirs. Then you have the decompression rhythm. So this is where we've mentioned about recovery and rest because it needs to be embedded, right? It's like, okay, cool. This is going to be a 3 week sprint, a 3 month sprint. We need to focus on this project and this project alone because this is our biggest client yet. We cannot let them down. If we get this client, it means we're going to be set up for the next decade because they have X amount, X, Y, and Z projects that they're going to be giving to somebody, and we want those contracts. So this one is really important. I'm bringing the A team together. We're going to be focusing on that. So you're only going to be working on that for the next 3 months, while everyone else is going to be picking up what's left over. After that 3 months is over, there needs to be a break. There needs to be some kind of acknowledgement of the work they've done. Whether it's okay, cool. I know you've got annual leave, but if you can hold it just until then, and we're all going to take that time off, right? I don't know what it might be, right? That might not be feasible for an individual team, which is small. But you might say, okay, we're going to go on a team building trip. We're going to do this, that, and the third, whatever it is. There needs to be in the same way as how you complete the stress cycle as an individual. You go through this time of stress, and at the end, once the challenge is complete, you're meant to do something that signals to your body that the stress is over, and you can go back to a regulated space, rest and digest. And you can do that through your breathing, through celebration, through a meal with friends, through a holiday and a break, through whatever it might be, giving your team time to recover from that period before going on to anything else is really needed. And I would encourage actually embedding it into your systems. So if you know there's going to be these periods, actually build in periods of rest in between. It's like, okay, cool. This period of time we need all hands on deck, but afterwards we're going down to 30%, right? We're taking the Wednesdays off or Fridays off for the next 3 weeks or something like that. And everyone can just relax, whatever it might be. And then why is you model regulation first? Like I said before, you model it, right? So this is what it looks like. Like I mentioned, I put together something for a client before, and this is what it looked like on a week to week. This was a really short sprint, by the way. This was only 4 weeks, but we had to do a lot within that time. So week one looked like the audit of the stress signals and urgency language. So it looked like the corporate stress mapping model that I mentioned, so we can see where the signals are coming from. And then we looked at the urgency language, like how we're communicating, things like that right now, and what needed to change. Week two was looking at the clarifying the top three priorities. What are the things that needed to be done right now? And we actually put the other things aside for that for the rest of the month. And what we did there is we sent emails out to the clients to say, listen, we have X, Y, and Z. We're going to prioritize these ones. So are you okay with these ones being delivered later? And you'll be surprised what happened. Like they were actually really understanding and said, actually, have completely forgotten about this one. That's not really needed. But I know you wanted to remove this one, but this one actually does need to be. So then we were able to say, okay, cool. This one we're going to leave as a priority, but these ones we're going to push down, right? And this has actually happened. I've been on the receiving end of this as well, where there is an influx of workload, and we had to prioritize things differently and speak to different clients to say, hey, we have this period of time. I know you're giving us this deadline, but does it matter if it comes now or in a month's time? And actually, they were really understanding about it because we've built a good rapport with them already. All right, week three was changing the meeting with them. So it was less reactive. So it wasn't that we waited for things to go wrong to have a meeting about it. We would have meetings regularly, And within those meetings, we had space designed for something that was urgent, something that might have been an emergency. We also had space designed for looking ahead. It's like, okay, I predict that this is going to be happening over the next week. Okay, this person is going to be away at that time. This thing is happening with our, I don't know, the computers, and we need to factor this in when we're doing this. It's taking too long to process the uh, programs or something. I don't know, right? So all these things you start doing in a regular meeting rhythm, and that might be like just a 20-minute check-in at the beginning of the day. Okay, what's happening with you? What do you need? Okay, who do you need it from? Okay, perfect. What about you? What are you doing right now? What do you need, and who do you need it from, and by when? Okay, cool, perfect. Going through round the circle, and then you come to the end and say, okay, what can I do to make your work easier? What do you need me to do? It's like, okay, cool. We actually need so and so resources. Okay, I'm going to speak to the directors. We're going to see what we can do and get that to you by the end of the day. Perfect. Off you go. And then we move. And then the last part, which is week 4, was the embedded recovery, like I said. So at this point, this is when you start to look at repair, because by the time that month, and we predicted this, we knew things were going to be happening, right? We knew it was going to be a stressful period of time. So we knew that we're going to need a period of whatever has been happening, whatever hasn't been said, whatever hasn't been communicated, whatever conflict might be there, we're going to address it by this particular point. So we actually had some recovery time towards the end of that month, which is basically saying, okay, cool. It's kind of like when you have a family meeting. It's like, okay, this happened. This is how it made me feel. This is what would have um, made me feel differently. And it was something that meant that by the end of the month, not only had we delivered what we said we would deliver, but also we actually maintained the culture, the trust. And it was actually built even more because it meant that, oh, wow, I can say that I wasn't happy with something, and it didn't result in a breakdown of connection with this person or trust with this person. Actually, it made it better. And I always refer this, I always parallel business to personal, because it's I mean, we're all people at the end of the day, like I said before. But that happens in general. That's how trust works. The challenge is, if I feel like there's going to be a breakdown in relationship, if I bring something up, then I'll find all kinds of ways not to bring it up. But that thing doesn't go away, and so it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. So when we have a environment, a culture, a relationship where I can come to you with something that other people will consider a conflict, but I'll be able to say, oh, I'm not happy with this, or I need this, or what happened here, and we can talk about it and come to a conclusion because we're on the same team. And I know that it's actually better for me to speak to you about it than not. Then that can grow that recovery, right? That can really build that repair process to the point where sometimes you might not even need a repair process at the end of it because you're dealing with things as they go. So this is what that meeting shift looked like. So I mentioned that regular shift. Um, One of the things we did here, because I mentioned something that I did for another project, but what we did in this particular project was status meetings, um, replacing the status meetings with regulation meetings. So it wasn't necessarily about, okay, where are we at this? It was actually looking at the person. So what's the reality here? What's really happening? um, what is actually urgent, what are we not saying, and actually having that question here brought up a lot to the surface that sometimes people just need the container, the the controlled space to be able to say something that might be vulnerable, because if not, they might hold it in even with a great culture. um, so actually having a question is like, what isn't being said that needs to be, and we go one by one. Actually ended up being a really what's the word I'm looking for? Really fruitful in that sense. Number 4 was, where is capacity being exceeded, and then what needs renegotiation. These last two are really important. Where is capacity being exceeded? Where are you being stretched beyond your capacity? Where have we misjudged what your capacity might be, and without blame? without shame, because ultimately that doesn't do anything. Our main idea is to get all these things done. And so if you are working at your capacity, but you still need more and you don't have the capacity for that, then there's no point in blaming you with anything, because the work doesn't get done that way. What we do is like, okay, who does have capacity? Okay, cool. So you're able to do this. You take that right now. Okay, perfect. Because what you might find is next week, the person who didn't have capacity suddenly has capacity and they're able to manage it out. So overall, it balances out. But you have moments sometimes in a day, like, I just might not have the energy today to be as productive as I always am. Maybe someone's experiencing grief or loss, or something difficult, or they're just trying to process everything that's going on in the moment. Maybe they're going through their menstrual cycle, or maybe they're having some kind of a difficult health issue. All these kind of things could be happening, which can't always be seen, right? They're not always seen, but they're felt. So then you need to renegotiate. Okay, what we projected isn't being met, so we need to change this. And we need to communicate this to our client, communicate to our director, whatever it might be, so that they are aware, so we can manage the expectations. If we said we're going to deliver 12, but actually only going to be able to deliver 9, we need to let them know now so that they can do what they need to do on their side. And then what ends up happening is that they're thankful that you said it with enough time for them to do something about it, which builds the trust. So they know, okay, cool. I know I can work with this group because I know they will tell me the truth. They will tell me when they're struggling, which means with enough time for me to act on it. So I feel safer working with them. I'd rather that than work with that group who don't say anything. And then when I'm expecting 12, I get 9. So just a blueprint summary. Oh, we've covered so much today. Just a summary of what we've covered. We've had the diagnostic lens for regulation patterns, and we've gone through that earlier on. We've got the escalation loop disruption framework. We've got the 30-day culture reset plan, which is that 4 weeks thing. We've got a blueprint for steadiness, which is the steady framework. Wonderful. Questions, put them in the comments, put them in the chats. Even if you're watching this after the workshop, put your questions in the comments and I'll answer them as soon as I can. Because I think I have covered a lot. And I'm sure, I hope that there will be questions, because it keeps the conversation going and it means that I can deliver more clarity as well. Um, yeah. And the thing is, I always have Morpheus on here because at this point, I've got to recognize that some people are going to be looking at this thinking, okay, that's great, but I've tried some of that stuff and it's really difficult. And I know this because my role exists for a reason, because it's difficult. Sometimes you need someone external to be able to create the safest environment to be able to do all this. Sometimes, like the clients that we use as a case study within this um, workshop, need someone who can build it into a process, right, for the company. Sometimes you need someone who can help a leader regulate and work on their tone, and you know look at, okay, we had this meeting. So for example, with team coaching, you might have me come into a normal team call like you normally would, and to be able to notice what energy shifts are happening, and oh, did you notice that, or what did you notice about that, and how could we approach that slightly differently, what options, what other results could we hope for in this situation, how can we do this? You might need some support with all of that. And if that's the case, then we also have the Ascend cohort, which is a program. It's 12 weeks. They're starting in June. And it's for leaders who want to lead under pressure without passing stress down to their teams. It's for leaders who want to regulate decision making and communication. It's for leaders who want to build resilient team culture. And it's for leaders who want to protect their high performance without burning out. The June cohort is starting in, I think it's the 2nd of June, and it's £500 for the investment for that 12-week program, and there's 20 spaces. So what I would say as well is if you're an organization and you have a leadership team where you've got a bit of a budget per head, then it might be something which you might want to consider to bring your cohort to, or you can DM me, and I do offer it as a program that I can effectively be an external party to work with the company. But if there's only 2 or 3, there may be something you cover for them. If you're an individual and you just want to be better at managing your stress, um, because you don't want to impact the team, your company, your community, your family with how you manage stress, then this one's for you as well. And it's not necessarily, you don't have to wait till actual burnout to do something about it. Um, and if you're interested in that, just send, I'll put the link in the comments of the Ascend program, or you can DM me Ascend and I'll send you the link as well. If you need a call, then there's a 30-minute link that I can send you, which is free of charge. We can basically talk about what you're experiencing, if this is right for you, if you're not sure, and just message DM me that as well, and I'll send that to you. Okay, I think that's it in terms of the session. Now, in terms of the Q&A, I would say if there's anyone who has any questions, like I said, put it in the chats, put it in the comments, and I will respond. I will answer. And I really love questions, so please do ask them. Don't hold back. Just as a concept to leave you with, because I did say we're going to be finishing at 8. We're finished. It's 10 to right now, which is almost bang on the money. What's one stress signal in your culture, your work culture, that should say, you can no longer ignore? What is one stress signal in your work culture that you can no longer ignore? What is one of those signals where, and we've talked about this before in terms of the signals, what's one of those signals that's causing the most damage, but no one's doing anything about? And thanks again, Alex. Clarity is so important in all aspects of life. Great place to start, 100%. Could not agree more. Perfect. So, thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. It's been an actual pleasure. And like I said, I'm really glad that I put this one on LinkedIn, which means I will be able to keep it up, keep it on replay. So if you have somebody who might need to see this, then just send them the link. If you want to explore some of this being delivered within your company, then send this to someone who's the decision maker. Maybe they're in HR, L&D, something like that. And it's something that as a workshop I can deliver. If this is a workshop in terms of the corporate stress mapping model, if the steady framework, any of those frameworks that you want to implement within your company, then you can DM me and we can explore that as well. I hope whatever you're doing, you have a great evening, and I will see you in 2 weeks. One of the things I think I'm thinking of doing is, now I do have workshops that are happening um, within my school community, but I don't think I'm going to promote them on LinkedIn. I think on LinkedIn, I'm just going to stick to the LinkedIn workshops. So that way we just keep them separate. But just know that if you want to do any more deep dives, that I do have a school community which has 3 levels. So the free is really just for the discussions. which is valuable as well because you get to speak to other people who might be experiencing burnout, be able to have tools to work against burnout. Um, we discover what works for each person and what doesn't. What I find is the peer learning piece is so valuable because you can Google, you can chat GPT what you need to do, but sometimes you just need to hear about someone who's actually experienced it and see yourself, your own struggle in what they're talking about for you to be able to say, actually, no, that might work for me and test it out and actually see it work. I've seen it time and time again. It's really valuable. The second level is the knowledge level. And this is where you get all the tools, you get all the toolkits, you get all the systems, you get all the workshops, all the deep dives, all those kind of things. And then the third level is for coaching. So this is where we have a group coaching session every week. And that one is just for us to come in and you talk about your own experiences and I will group coach everyone in that session. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your energy. I hope this has been valuable for you. Please do give me some kind of feedback. Is this something that you appreciate? Is it works? Is there something that was missing maybe? Is there something that you found in when it comes to your organizational stress spreading along the teams that I haven't mentioned? Or maybe there's something that I have mentioned that you hadn't thought about. It'd be great to hear your feedback on that as well.